Welcome to episode 4 of the Futebol podcast.
Oh, it's a beautiful goal, isn't it? A beautiful goal.
What a save! Messi enganchó como le gusta, él probó con zurda.
Morta again, another time, the shot on the foot of it!
Oh, what a goal! What a goal that is!
What a goal from David Beckham!
Zinedine, va passar.
Different class. Different class.
My name is James Carew, co-editor of Futebol website and magazine, and you're listening to the 4th edition of the podcast, coinciding with the launch of the brand new issue 6. Futebol takes a close look at football culture, historic matches, iconic figures and more, and how photography and art can be inspired by the beautiful game. Our brand new issue, issue 6, is now available to order from pogmagol.bigcartel.com. 64 pages where football meets design, with contributors from both Ireland and 16 other countries. But before we continue with today's episode, there's this.
As Butraga to his left and Valdano to his left, he won't need any of them. Oh, you have to say that's magnificent. There is no debate about that goal. That was just pure football genius.
Enrique to Maradona. Different class.
Different class. When they talked about the great players of World Championship football, this man will be on a pedestal. Diego Armando Maradona.
On today's episode, we're joined once more by the author of a feature article from issue 6 of the magazine, and we'll be taking a closer look at the piece in a few moments. But first, on the day we are recording, the sad news has broken of the death of a player many regard as one of the greatest to ever grace the game. Diego Maradona has passed away at the age of 60. My co-host today again is Joe Phelan, a news editor based in London and contributor to Futebol. Welcome back, Joe, and your reaction first of all to the sad news.
I'm probably going to wax a bit lyrical here, but because I know Maradona was playing club football until the mid-90s in Argentina, but even though he was still a player during my lifetime, his peak undoubtedly came before I was born, so I've never really seen anything other than highlights and clips. And having lived in England for my entire life, there's a particularly contentious clip involving a missed handball that I've seen countless times. But you can tell just from watching him play for a couple of seconds that he was almost a different species of player. The way the ball just seemed to absolutely fall under a spell whenever it came within his vicinity, and that he could seemingly always predict where a tackle was going to come from and then elegantly avoid it. It was almost like he was baiting the opposition. And I spoke on the podcast recently about how players like Zidane and Cantona, they had the ability to make football seem effortless. And while Maradona absolutely had the ability to do the same, like every time I see clips of him, it's almost like he was humouring the other players just by being on the same pitch as them and by participating in the same game, because he was just so evidently superior. It's like when Usain Bolt was in his prime, it just didn't seem fair on the other people that were involved. And it takes a pretty special player or a pretty special person to be able to transcend their endeavour, or like in this regards, a sport, and then become a face that's known globally. So even to people with zero interest in football, they know who he is. They know the face of Maradona, and that's a real indication of the fact that he was far more than a player. And he was, and I'm sure he always will be, an icon and a hero in Argentina. He'll be forever loved in Naples, where he played the best club football of his career. and he's always going to be regarded by football fans, whether they saw him play or whether they didn't, as someone who progressed the game. So he did things that people had never seen before, and they arguably didn't see again until Messi came on the scene. And I don't think that's going to be forgotten in a hurry. And finally, I spoke to my dad just before I did this recording, and he's Irish, so he has a particular fondness for anyone who's been able to humiliate the English in any capacity. So I generally take his anti-English rhetoric with like a pinch of salt. But my dad is absolutely adamant that he's never seen anyone that comes close to Maradona, and that's taken into account Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. And given that my dad's watched football for far longer than I have, and he's seen both Messi and Maradona playing when they were at the peaks of their respective powers, I've got to a certain extent, I've got to accept that my dad probably has a better gauge on the greatness debate than I do.
It's pretty phenomenal looking through social media today. Almost every single tweet, from players to every football club to sports publications and outlets around the world, is all about him. So our guest today is Bruno Rodrigues, a journalist from Sao Paulo in Brazil, a reporter with Folha de Sao Paulo, a major newspaper in Brazil, and also the curator of the Futebol Cafe website. Welcome to the Pogue Goal podcast, Bruno. First of all, what's your reaction to the death of Diego Maradona?
Well, hello, James, Joe. It's very nice to being here with you. I hope I can make myself understand to you all. I'm still like dazzled. I think that's the word, right? You know. My dad sent me a message, and he told me that Clarín, a major newspaper in Argentina, published the news of Maradona's passing. So I went like, everything starts to move faster when you get this kind of news. So I got my cell phone. I went to Twitter first to see other news outlets, and they were already publishing and doing the repercussion of Maradona's death. So I'm still like, it's like it hasn't happened, you know. I have this feeling of we'll take a couple of days or a couple of weeks, I don't know, until we realize what's going on, who's passed, Maradona's legacy, the impact that he will have in his death will have in Argentina, in Argentinian football, in Argentinian life. I mean, it's very crazy what's going on today while we are recording this and talking about the death of one of the greatest. I think I might go to the same path as Joe, as he said about his father. And I haven't seen Maradona too playing. All I saw was documentaries, videos, YouTube videos of Maradona in World Cups and in clubs and in Napoli, in Boca Juniors. So I had this, I made this myth in my head of what Maradona was like a football player. And my father was the person that brought me some reality to it, because he saw.
Obviously, Argentina are Brazil's great rivals, sporting rivals. So how was Maradona perceived amongst Brazilian football fans? I know, for example, Messi is adored. He transcends football rivalry. And the debate was always Maradona versus Pelé. And I know in recent weeks Maradona has undergone major surgery. And if you saw the scenes outside the hospital when it went successfully, the hordes of people chanting the doctor's name, slapping him on the back. I know that Pelé is not universally loved in Brazil. So I'm really curious to know, what is the opinion of Maradona in Brazil?
Yeah, I think people in general had this impression of the rivalry of Argentina versus Brazil, and of this rivalry between the two greatest of each country, of Pelé and Maradona.
Yeah.
But it's funny, because here in Brazil, there are lots of people who admire Diego Maradona. I mean, I have a friend that today he tweeted, and I work with him at the newspaper, and he tweeted like, Argentina lost maybe its most important person today.
Yeah.
And it's a Brazilian saying that. The only parallel that we can make in Argentinian history, maybe it's with Juan Domingo Perón, which was the president of the Peronism throughout the 40s and the 50s. So that's the comparison. It transcends football. It transcends what happened in the pitch in World Cups. It's a national thing. And here in Brazil, there's this general impression of the rivalry of like diminishing Maradona's legacy and his career. But I personally admire, and it was one of my greatest idols. I couldn't see him playing like I said, but it was one of the references, one of those players that you dream about. It was a persona that it was most in my dreams, in my head, of imagining how it was living the Maradona days, So there's the general impression, but lots of people admire Maradona, and there are people, including who think that Maradona was better than Pelé. You can find these people here in Brazil. You can find Brazilians who had this opinion, which is bizarre. But I still think Pelé is the greatest, but not too much above Diego Maradona.
I think as well, one of the things that makes this whole that him dying so surprising is during my lifetime, the only times that I ever see Maradona in the news is when he's going into hospital, or when he is ill, or when he's having issues with drugs or alcohol or something. And he's always sort of, like, over time, accumulated this persona of almost being immortal. Like he'd go through these things all the time, and then he'd come out the other side, and then next he'd be the manager of some team in Dubai or something. And it's like these things, obviously they were taking a toll on his body, but it was almost like they weren't. It's like, he's back to normal now. The doctors have sorted him out. And I think it's a similar thing to when George Best died. So people knew that he was going through difficulties. He was having troubles with alcohol and stuff, but he kept seeming like he was overcoming them. And then all of a sudden, his body just gave up on him, and it's very sad. And I think a lot of people will have maybe seen this coming because he's been in and out of hospital so frequently. But I think that it doesn't diminish the shock any less, really.
Maradona's goal against England in 1986, the goal that he dribbles a lot of players, and it's like a metaphor of Maradona's life in the last 30 years. Lots of Argentinian journalists, they say this. They say that Maradona's life was like a constant dribble. He was always dribbling problems in life, and those in the hospitals and doctors. So now at 60, we were expecting that he would dribble once more, but he was very bad in a very bad health condition, and we could see it while he was training Gimnasia Esgrima, the club that he was coaching. You saw during games that he was not okay, but people didn't know that he was in such a bad condition. And this last weeks showed us that he was in really bad shape, suffering from problems involved his medication and maybe alcohol. People talk a lot about Maradona, especially in Argentina, of course, but about his health, there was no secure information about what was going on.
I think that's a fabulous image of that goal against England being a metaphor for his life. I think the goal will always be remembered, and therefore he will always be remembered. And so, staying in South America, Bruno, let's take a look at your article for the Pogum Goal magazine.
To many fans, Marta Vieira da Silva is known simply as Marta. She's the most prominent name in women's football history.
Breathtaking Marta. Sandra Senior, and that's 3.
Playing football has always been an uphill fight for Brazilian women.
Marta makes it 1-0.
In a country where football is rooted in its culture, women were banned from the sport.
When I was small, I had to play with boys, and there was a lot of prejudice.
The times I played in the street of my city and how hard it was because the boys did not want me to play.
E o futebol feminino depende de vocês.
Though we still have a long way to go, these girls can now say they are playing in the only country in the Americas that's starting to close the gender pay gap.
you explore the history of women's football in Brazil.
Yeah, I start the article talking about the last World Cup in 2019 because I think it was a shifting point to women's football, not only in Brazil, but in other countries that are still developing women's football. And we had the opportunity to see and to watch all the games in live television, in open air channels. Sadly, we have the pandemic right now. It was like a break from this development that women's football was experimenting here in Brazil. The Brazilian Confederation, the Football Confederation, tried to ease the difficulties of the clubs by lending them some money to keep the women's department. But some clubs mismanage this help, this financial help. What the clubs decided to do with that money was their own decision. There were clubs that simply got this money and used for the men's team. But there was a shift. I mean, the World Cup last year showed us that women's football can be great. You can see great games. The World Cup had a great level, especially at the final phases of the tournament. It was great to watch. And not only Brazil, other national teams too, that we didn't know very well. And as I told at the article, Brazilian football, women's football, was forbade for almost 40 years in Brazil. It started in the 40s by the Getúlio Vargas government, and only in 1978-79 the government allowed women to play football professionally and legally. In this period, of course, there were women who played football illegally, who managed to keep playing, to keep doing what they love to do. And that, of course, it was a huge setback to developing women's football in Brazil. Formiga, which is 42, it will be 43 in the Olympics next year in Tokyo. She was born in that period. So she began to know football as something forbidden to women. If you could imagine how many Formigas we could have if football was not forbade for so long.
So I'm interested to know what attendances are like at women's football, like club games, because in England, up until about 5 years ago, the attendances were incredibly low, like 200, 300 people. And that's started to creep up. And annoyingly, it was sort of hitting a really high level before the pandemic started, and now obviously everything's down to zero. But what sort of crowds do you get, and what's like the public appetite for women's football?
It's very low, Joe. It's very low, the attendance. We had last year a good experience with Campeonato Paulista. It's the championship from the state of São Paulo. We had Corinthians and São Paulo at the final, and Corinthians played in its stadium, in its big stadium that hosted the 2014 World Cup. It had more than 25,000 people at the game. And I believe they charged for tickets, which is not common. Here in Brazil, usually the games are for free. It's the record in Brazil for a women's game.
I should say my better half is Brazilian. So I've been to Brazil quite a number of times, and I don't think I've met one Brazilian woman who didn't follow football, watch football, have a football team. To me, it's a country where no matter what gender you are, you follow football. And in that respect, it was maybe a little surprising that it has taken so long for women's football to gain the steps it has done in terms of respect and equality.
Yeah, Jim. When you go to men's games here in Brazil, of the national championship or regional, Copa Libertadores, whatever, you can see lots of women in the stands. It was a shift. I mean, I think for the last 20 years, the number of women at football stadiums grew a lot. And that's great to see. You go to stadiums now in Brazil, when you can, not during the pandemic, of course. You have groups of fans which are exclusively from women. We call here torcidas organizadas, like the organized group of fans. Not the hooligan kind of group of fans, but who has its songs, who has its clothes. So you have these groups of women. What I think the problem was in practicing football, in playing football. And then we go back to the prohibition. during this almost 40 years, because the society didn't see girls playing football as a natural thing. You see women cheering and going to matches, but you still don't see too many women playing. I think this is changing, and the World Cup last year was great because of that.
In your article, you quote from 1941 a Ministry of Education official who said a woman's foot was not made to fit football shoes, which I think gives you an indication of the thinking of the time. You also have the story of Leia Campos Medina, who was a referee and who would referee matches undercover and was arrested up to 15 times. And who eventually had to go, was it the military president, to gain a certificate to be a referee at an international tournament. It's very interesting because in Ireland, for example, in recent years, the women's national team effectively went on strike, and it made headlines around the world when they revealed things like they would only be given tracksuits in the airport and they would have to change in the airport bathrooms into their national team tracksuits and give them back afterwards. So, and this is only a number of years ago. There is a huge drive in Ireland at the minute to make women's sport more visible, and there's a much bigger profile on the women's national team. So I'm interested if that's a growing phenomenon in Brazil. I know that your piece finishes with the fact that just this year they're being granted, is it equal pay as the men's national team?
Yeah, it's the daily payment that national players receive while they're on national duty. It was just in 2020 that women gained this recognition. What can help, and it wasn't in the article, now the Confederation has 2 directors who are women, taking care of women's football. Brazil went to the 2019 World Cup with a man director to manage the women's team, and that was a controversial statement of the Confederation, like, why there aren't women who are managing the national team. Now we have 2 women who are very well prepared. One of them was with the Paulista Federation, the regional football association here in the state of São Paulo, and the other, which was a director of Internacional, a club from Rio Grande do Sul, from the southern part of the country. I guess this will also have a great impact on how people see women's football. Girls and young women will see them as one of them.
It's just interesting that you read out that quote from the 40s saying, what was it, a woman's foot is not made to fit in a football boot. That seems like, and I'm quite reluctant to get overly political here, but Bolsonaro has been saying similar things. He was very anti-women. He thought women had very, very specific roles that they should fulfill. Do you think there's a chance this movement could be pushed back, or that people will stop playing football, or has it sort of got momentum of its own now and it's going to happen regardless?
Yeah, Joe. This is important to talk about. As I said, we are in a good moment, I think, of women's football in Brazil, despite the pandemic. We have a great prospect of what women football in Brazil will be like in 4 or 5 years. But of course, with Bolsonaro as a president, it's a setback to this development, and not just in football. His own government has just a few women who are in public places, like taking decisions. We could be in a better moment if we had a president who looks, and I'm not talking about football, but looks at this to develop opportunities to women at the labor market, for example. And we do not have this. We have, like you said, quite the opposite. We have a misogynist president, and I think for the next 2 years minimum, we'll still have to struggle with it. But at women's football particularly, I think mostly because of that women who are now in the Brazilian Confederation, I think it's a good moment. I think we can be confident it will continue growing.
Well, Joe, you've mentioned Bolsonaro because Bruno's second article in issue 6 is a smaller feature specifically about Bolsonaro and how the famous Brazilian shirt has become a symbol of the supporters of the president. And conversely, Bruno, the away kit, the blue kit of Brazil, became more popular as an anti-Bolsonaro movement.
Yeah. I mean, Bolsonaro is a nationalist in his own way. So what are the symbols that you can use as a nationalist voter, as a nationalist Brazilian? The national team shirt is one of them. So people went to the streets during the last presidential campaign with Brazilian shirt, the yellow shirt, which is it was very funny because it was the same time that the Brazilian Confederation, the Brazilian Football Association, was facing corruption cases that it was news through the whole world, like presidents in jail. We have a president in jail, an ex-president who was the president in the 2014 World Cup, which is José Maria Marim. He was in jail in the United States. The other one cannot leave the country. So it was funny to see people believing that they were wearing a strong political statement wearing that shirt, while you had that symbol of the Brazilian Confederation. There are some leftist movements and popular movements who are trying to conquer back the Brazilian shirt. Brazilian at the last Copa America in 2019, they wore a white shirt, which was the color that Brazil used at the beginning of the last century until 1950. Until the 1950 World Cup, Brazil wore white, and then there was the Maracanazo, a big setback to the Brazilian football and national history. So to the next World Cup in 1954, Brazil wore yellow through a competition of drawings that designers had to think a new Brazilian shirt. So it's kind of new that Brazilians playing yellow. At the Copa America, people started this movement of let's try to get back the Brazilian shirt as a symbol of all the Brazilians, a national symbol, not a nationalist symbol as Bolsonaro and as his voters and his supporters were trying to do and are still trying to do with the national shirt.
It's very funny that you come from a country on the other side of the world, but football being the universal language, the same stories can apply here. Again, in Ireland's case, we're coming through a controversial head of the FA who recently left the association. But like that, because of the scandal that he brought on the association, many people regarded the national team as his team and therefore wanted nothing to do with it. It's very interesting how the same issues can be applied in other parts of the world. It's been brilliant having you on, Bruno. This was the whole reason we wanted to do the Futebol magazine, was that we can invite contributors from all over the world. To have a Brazilian journalist writing for an Irish publication with an Irish illustrator is exactly what we wanted to do. Your website, Futebol Cafe, what is the type of content we could find on there?
Yeah, well, Futebol Cafe is a website about football literature. I try to show Brazilian the readers what's going on with football literature at the whole world, at other countries, because we are still beginners in that. In writing books about football, in publishing magazines. We're a big country. We have a national magazine which is famous, that is Revista Placar. It's from 1970 and have a few setbacks at the last few years, but they are trying to get back on track. But we have few magazines, we have few football books being published. So what I try to show in Futebol Cafe, what's the world doing in terms of football literature, and Pogmogol was one of that. I've published an article about the magazine and about the shift that you guys made from that newspaper shape to a more orthodox magazine, which I thought it was great to see how the illustrations were published and featured at the magazine. So this is what I try to bring to the Brazilian readers.
I think that's brilliant. I think, Joe, you'll agree it's been brilliant talking to Bruno today.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I'm the same as you, James. I absolutely love talking to people from other sides of the world and then realising that the stories could actually just easily be applied to the English Premier League.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
No, I would like to thank you, James and Joe, for the invitation. It was very special. I hope my broken English, it was not a disappointment. In this special day, it's sadly the day of Maradona's passing, but also a special day. So we're here talking about him, about football, and about the magazine too. So thank you very much.
I can assure you, Bruno, your English is better than my Portuguese. And Joe, thank you for joining us as ever.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Again, on what is a sad day for football, you have three people from different parts of the world who didn't see Maradona play, but his legend has lived on into our lifetimes. And I think that's a great tribute to him as well. And that's it for the latest episode of the Pogmagol podcast. Listen out for future editions with more guests who've contributed stories, photography, art and more to both the magazine and website. Tell us what you think by contacting us on social media at Pogmagol. For more features like this, order your copy, issue 6 of the Pogmagol magazine from pogmagol.bigcartel.com. And join us next time on the Pogmagol podcast.